Well, it's time for another edition of Tell Me How You're Mighty. Talking about cheating, Sarah Gorrell and Tracy Shawn once again unpicking some of the carry on and the issues that you'll face when your relationship has broken down, down to some scurrilous goings on and some cheating related antics. And today, Tracy, something we've both
Yeah.
experienced, and this is becoming a single parent, when the idea that your whole family is going to be torn apart and you are going to be a single parent, and how that might sometimes keep you with a cheater. I know it nearly did me. And what about you? Did you think, oh, I can't blow up our lovely little proper
Oh,
family. I can't be a single
sure.
parent.
Yeah, that's like the number one fear, I think, listed on Chump Lady, like why you stay with cheaters is because you have to stay for the children. And that is still super, super strong in our psyche. And to pick it, because there are people who will still argue that it would be great if you had two invested, fully sane parents, but a lot of people don't get that. A lot of people don't get two of that. So I always argue it's better to be the sane parent and at least you can keep your side of the street clean. But when I went through it, I had already gotten divorced when my son was 4, and that was hard to be a single parent. The right choice, totally. The guy had untreated mental illness. That's why the first one broke up. But when the second one cheated on me, that was supposed to be my happy ever after, and I was only married 6 months. So the whole failure is not an option. I don't want to be a two-time loser. How could I put my son through this again? That was that was so painful, right? So I completely get it.
I think sometimes though, it's when you do move yourself out of the relationship and you distance yourself from it, you realize how dysfunctional it actually is. And when you're able to
Yeah.
observe their parenting style and how uninvested they really are in parenting, that's when you realize that you haven't really lost a co-partner, a co-parent. My friend used to describe it to me as, well, you've lost a fifth child to bring up. You've got
Yeah.
your children, and actually, I love this first message that's come in, and which highlights the dysfunction really. And I have to say that when I was bringing my children up on my own, 3 boys, we were living in a sea of Lego, lots of Lego. So
Oh, yeah.
this one actually involves that very common.
Hi, am I happy to be parenting solo and being a single mom over 80% of the time? Yes. The toxicity in our house during our marriage, when it came to parenting, was always there. And I served as the buffer while we lived as a family unit under one roof. Now that we're under two roofs, I have the ability to hear stories from my son on the stupid things that my ex-husband says to him. And I now am able to use those as teachable moments and to educate him on having boundaries and thinking for himself and advocating for himself. Most recently, my ex-husband told him that he needed to give up his Lego fascination because if he continued to play with Legos, he'd never be able to get a girlfriend. So glad I don't have that living under my roof again. Thanks for what you're doing.
Can you believe this dad said that to him? Like, you'll never have a woman like you have Legos, you play with Legos, you got to give that up. I-
I just find it's staggering. Where
Yeah,
does he but being, if you're worried about your children doing anything, playing go is not one of them. That's not one of the things that you want to put the fear of God into them and say, oh, you'll never be a functional adult if you play with Lego. I know from going to the
yeah.
Lego shop in Brighton that there are many fully grown men that continue to play with Lego,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah,
a
my
lot of them had their partners in tow, which indicates that this was completely wrong in the
and
first
also
place.
girls like Legos. Hello? Like what where is this guy getting his idea? I mean, it's also just a belittling, terrible thing to say to somebody, to undermine the thing they love and tell them how it makes them unlovable. I mean, that's pretty much what he's saying. And yes, to your point that grown men like Legos. My son is 27. He's getting married next spring, and he still loves Legos. So, yeah, fuck you and your doomsday.
And it's also it's putting your own expectation on your children. The one thing about being a parent is surely you let your children be who they want to be. And if Lego is one of those things, let them get on with it. Don't put your expectation because you don't like them having it, that some terrible a future will be bestowed upon them. It's just a ridiculous whatever you're saying. It's just a horrible way of parenting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think because she's divorced, getting to the the point of our podcast here, why don't stay together for the children. I like how she says that goes on in his house, in my house, that doesn't happen. We don't have that kind of toxicity. And she uses it as a teaching moment when her son tells her upsetting things like this. Is he can see it. She's not caught up in it, right? She doesn't have to buffer. She doesn't, she just chooses not to live that way. And she models sanity and good parenting. And I think her son will come out okay because of that. He's not going to internalize that he's some loser because his dad said so. You know, the thing to do is get away
You're
from
giving your
losers.
children the opportunity to retreat from this nonsense to the sane household. But I think what happens when you are in a situation where nobody, when you get married and you have children with someone, you always imagine that that is going to be it, that you'll be together, that you'll welcome the grandchildren together, that
Yeah.
you'll be there through all the moments. And it's absolutely devastating when that isn't the case. And also there is a lot of media stuff which sort of indicates that particularly single mothers that they're
Hmm.
responsible for a lot of the bad
Oh, yeah.
behavior, people going to prison, people not doing well. So when you suddenly find yourself as the single mother, the person that people blames for no one, there are very few articles that say well done you single mothers,
There
or well
should
done
be
you single
more.
dads, you're amazing, you've done a good job. It's
Yeah,
all the
I
doom
think
and
that's
gloom
our
that you
mission
see.
here. Good job, Sarah. Excellent work. Well done. Gold
So
star.
let's have a look at some of the stories that we've heard, and this first one sort of
Yeah.
highlights a lot of it. You think that you're going to become a single parent, but actually you've already really been one. So this is a single mum from the time my daughter was born. My child's father, we were married, separated before she was born, really wasn't interested in being a dad. She was planned. I never had any issues with strangers. Some relatives weren't too impressed that I chose to raise her by myself. Religious views, that was their problem. When she was 3, my best friend, my boyfriend and I decided
I
to
know it's
co-parent
best friend.
oh, best friend. My When
Yeah.
she was 3, my best friend and I decided to co-parent our children. Best decision ever. Our kids are amazing. I love that idea then. So her best friend and her
Yeah.
co-parented the children. You give each other that your own support network.
I loved this story and I reached out to her to I'm like because I mean it's kind of like some golden girl's dream, right? Like instead of old age, like you're single parenting, but you're doing it in this kind of collective. So I had this DM exchange with her and she explained how this arrangement came to be and there's actually like legal paperwork involved. And she said my best friend was a single mom of 4 and the father of the children was physically abusive. And the night I intervened, he beat her unconscious. A couple of weeks after this happened, she was told to make plans for her children as we really had no means to guarantee her safety. It was suggested that she give somebody legal guardianship of the children, which didn't take away her rights, but just added to mine. I was a safe place for them to go if needed. It took a couple years for everything to settle down, and she had the opportunity to take away the guardianship, but it was working for us. So we started off living together and then across the street from one another, so the children still had both of us. When my husband came into the picture, to him it was messed up, but it was our normal. And I asked, she's still married to this guy, by the way. That the her child's father was not in the picture, but husband is a good guy. So he comes into the
It
scene.
reminds me of the whole thing that sometimes people say it takes a village to raise a child, and
Yeah,
just because you're on your own doesn't mean you have to be completely on your own. There are other people that will step up, and quite often it is really good friends who will be there, and they will not be necessarily the other parent, but they'll certainly provide a lot of that support that you need that their own biological parent isn't there for.
yeah, and she's years out, and this is the part I like. So she did this unconventional, amazing thing of co-parenting her friend's children to help her out of an abusive situation. And now they're grandparents, right? This is years ago. So they're really pioneers. She said when she got a job opportunity a couple hours away, the children moved with her. She still brought them to me on weekends and holidays. We raised 5 children together. She's mom and I'm mama. We have 2 beautiful grandsons and a great life and a great friendship. So,
Fantastic. I love that story.
me
Okay, we've got
too.
another one then. What's
All
the
right.
next?
Okay. This one is I actually wanted to stay together with my fuckwit, but he left me for the affair partner. At the time, I thought it would be best for the kids to stay together, and now with distance, I see how much better it is that we're divorced. I did and continue to do a lot of work on my own maladaptive emotional systems, and I'm an infinitely better parent. I can provide a healthy home that welcomes all feelings and isn't oriented around one man's fragile ego for my kids 50% of the time. And it would have been 0% if I'd stayed married. I'm realistic enough to acknowledge that there are absolutely aspects that are hard on the kids, but there are benefits. So she ends with life is messy and complex. But so this is someone who really wanted to stay and didn't get the choice, and then realized even after not getting the choice that, oh my God, it's saner without putting up with that guy.
It's only when you emerge out of it though that you can see it. And I think one of the things that really did keep me together with my husband when he had the affair for far too long is that fear that you'll lose that control, because at least
Yeah.
if his dysfunction is in your own household, you can manage it. When he relocates his dysfunction elsewhere
Oh
and
yeah.
brings an affair partner into proceedings, then your concern is I had a couple of concerns. Firstly, she's lured my husband away from me. Is she going to win my kids over as well? And secondly, I there's going to be a part of me that doesn't see them anymore. They're going to be off in that how I mean, in lots of ways, I was lucky because they were too busy going on holiday to have much to do. But I see that for a lot of people, their partners continue to use the children as a form of manipulation. They buy them
Yeah.
things, they try and win them over. They play the pick me dance, not with the affair partner, but with the kids. There can be some incredibly difficult situations to deal with.
It is. It's still better than living with a fuckwit and being devalued and abused. I mean, it's a hard thing. It's really hard to let your children be on the front lines of that because you do have this myth or this feeling that you are, as the first caller described it, a buffer, right? That you can manage their chaos and you can throw yourself on those grenades. And then when you're divorced, your kids just go over there. And it's so hard. I dealt with this because my son's father had untreated mental illness, and he still, even though I had all decision making, he still had visitation, and it was so hard. I finally came up with, okay, as long as he's not dead, like, because to go back to the court, I mean, and people go back to court for all sorts of little things, but judges see really horrific things. And unless it's drug addiction, drinking and driving, sexual abuse, unless it really rises to the level of imminent harm to the children, you're going to have a very hard time taking away people's parental rights. And I'm not a lawyer. I'm just telling you based on my experience and what I read on the blog. Talk to your own lawyer if you're in one of these situations and document everything that isn't to a court order if you ever think you're going to have to go into that. But I'm telling you, years out from sending a 4-year-old in to go live with a very chaotic man, that my kid survived. And that's why and not only did he survive, he turned out to be a really great young adult. We'll get into that later, how our kids turned out. But
I think though you
yeah,
say you have to let them go. I think you have to let the kids see for themselves. I think if you try and remove that relationship with the other parent, then ultimately that allows the children to create a fantasy world in their heads and to think, oh, maybe, and in the
yeah,
future, look back and say, but my dad was amazing. You didn't let me see him. What's been brilliant, my 2 youngest children do not see their father, but that was their decision. And he made very little effort with them to see them
mhm,
until they got to the point where they just said, we don't know this man. We don't want to relate. My 2 older children do see him, but they also see who he is.
Yeah,
I
they figured it out.
had to go through lots of him buying stuff and being the Disney dad, but they ultimately kids know who's been there for them, who's been the one to wash the uniforms and pick up the pieces and do the stuff for school, and they know that. You could
Yeah,
they
you
you can
showed up.
never take that away.
That's right. You showed up and kids get it. And if you, that's why I tell parents, like, look, don't editorialize, do what the court order says, and and just focus on your own quality of parenting and being the sane parent. It's really hard. It's really hard, but your kids, they're not going to get personality transplants, and your kids will have a front row seat to what this person's like. And I hope, for the sake of everybody out there, that they may have divorced a fuckwit, but I hope that fuckwit pays their child support and shows up and pays the dentist bill and does all the things that parents are supposed to do. Sadly, a lot of them don't. And just keep being the sane parent. I mean, it's a pretty primal thing to love your parents, but I'm telling you, years out, the sane parent, it's going to pay dividends, and your kids, for the most part, there's a few exceptions, but for the most part, they really figure it out, and you have a deeper relationship with your kids because of it. That's been my experience.
Sometimes they see it before you do. I like this next one.
Yeah.
Yes, my kids were first in line to tell me to leave him. They gave away his clothes and shoes. They torched his car. They were ready for the divorce before I was. And that's something I've heard before. It's not necessarily that uncommon.
Yeah. Right. Oh God, please leave him. Right. Or her. Right. And oftentimes kids, now this is rarely discussed with infidelity, is that the kids know that you're a chump before you're a chump, and they've been sworn to secrecy, and they have to carry this really painful secret around. And then your knowledge and divorce is a relief for them. It's a liberation. They don't have to keep secrets anymore. And it's awful that they ever had to live that way, but I'm sure they appreciate it ending. Torching the car though, don't torch the car, please.
Yeah, so actually you hear a lot of people that stay together for the sake of the children, but actually you should think about leaving for the sake of that. You very rarely hear that, do you? You sometimes read articles where it's all people pleased with themselves saying, "Oh, we got the affair through
Oh
the affair.
God.
We stayed together because of the kids, and look how marvelous how we kept our family together." But actually, by leaving, you are still keeping your family together. You're
That's
just
right.
creating a very different family, a different family dynamic, and maybe a more healthy family dynamic. Because I know that when I initially tried to keep our family together and tried to keep him here there, it wasn't the same. It was a family where I was constantly on edge that he was going to be back trotting off to see her. It was a very uncomfortable living experience for everyone. The moment he left, it was like relaxed. We could
Yeah.
just be ourselves without doing the pick me dance to try and get him to stay.
Yeah. How could that be anything but more sane? I wanted to point out the whole thing about a broken home. You know, you're still family, minus a fuckwit. There is no such thing as a broken home. We just have got to like just cut that out of our vocabulary. You're home. You're not broken because you're a single parent. You're home. Your children see you as home. There's no broken home. My child is not the product of a broken home. He had a loving mother. And eventually, in time, later, he had a loving stepfather. But it's all, whether it's a blended family, it's a single parent family, it's a home. Like, we have to expand our definition. It's not this intact, whatever dream we have of the nuclear family. I mean, I know things are changing, but we are still being pummeled with that crap, and it's in the narrative, and it pisses me off. You know?
Well, I had someone sort of tilt their head at me when they found out I was on my own with my children and say, "Oh, your poor children." But I was sitting in a pub with my son a couple of years ago, and he described his childhood as idyllic. He said, "I couldn't have had a
Oh,
better childhood." He was the one that discovered his father's affair. He found out what was going on. He witnessed his father leaving, but when he looks back at the whole of his childhood, he sees it as a very positive thing and a very happy time. So actually, I wonder whether that would be the case if his father had stayed, if we had stayed together, I suspect it might be a very different recollection of his childhood.
Sure. And what would you be modeling? I mean, that's the other thing I tell people to think about when they're on the brink of this decision is if you stay and eat the shit sandwich, what are you teaching your children about what to do when someone abuses you and hurts you? I mean, reconciliation, I call it a unicorn. I want to believe that people can do better, whatever, but it comes at great personal cost, and I just don't think it's highly likely. And all my reasons are all over the blog. But I'm saying if you model self-respect and you model mightiness and you go, I'm not going to pick me dance. I'm better than that. My children are better than that. We are not options. Goodbye. You've taught your children how to behave if anybody ever goads them into a pick me dance, that I am worth more than this. Goodbye. That's what they need to see modeled to them. And I think it really pays dividends in your life if you can do that. Versus if you grow up in a family of dysfunction and one person's the narcissist or the fuckwit, whatever we want to call them, and the other person is a chump who makes their needs really, really, really small and everybody caters to the big ego. That's messed up. So,
And that's the next thing, isn't it? This is the next submission is never mind leaving. Should have gone sooner.
yeah, right. Yeah. We're always about, I should have left sooner, right? I think I did a column on that once. I'm like, does anybody think they left too soon? Does anybody have regrets? Now, admittedly, it's a self-selecting sample of people who read my blog, but the overwhelming regret is I can't believe I stayed as long as I did. I'm killing myself about those lost years. So, go sooner. I like this comment. This one was, I'm a product of stayed together for the children, and it was a nightmare. I broke the cycle. I'm a better mother now more than ever.
I think this is it as well, isn't it? Children know. Sometimes very young children are very aware if
Yeah,
is attention creeps in, that even if you try and hide it, it's still very much there.
yeah. I wanted to read this one, and I like the story that there was a good therapist. I mean, I know they're out there, but on our earlier point about you're enough, right? You're not a broken home. She says, I remember crying in therapy that the divorce would destroy my kids. My therapist sat back and asked me why I thought that. Why did I only see the negative? Often big life-changing events do change people, and often for the better. Why was that not even a possibility for me? She reminded me of the foundation I already had in place. I had a solid relationship with my daughters, and they immediately said they wanted more time with me than him. And they were 13 and 17 then. They do well in school. They're well-mannered kids who are never in trouble, and they see me as the primary authority figure, and they respect me. And I put them into therapy 4 days after we told them we're divorcing. It's 3 years later, and I want to say that everything I was fearful of was a lie that my brain told me out of being trauma bonded. My daughters are thriving, and I'm a kick-ass mother, and my therapist was right. This life-changing event did change my kids for the better. My oldest is starting junior year in college and is looking at law school to be a family law attorney or guardian of the court. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I had 2 D-days 10 years apart, and I did stay for the children for 10 years, and I did leave, and leaving was a far better choice in the end. I changed, and he's still a fuckwit. So,
That's
yay!
such that's so inspiring, isn't it? Because who wants their 13 and a 17-year-old to witness what, I know that you're embroiled in a big discussion about whether cheating is abuse or not, but actually to witness abuse, to witness manipulation in the household, to witness the distrust that comes as a result of an affair. I just think
Grief.
I know my daughter, she sees me as somebody that can I don't need somebody else to manage. She knows that she can do it on her own. She doesn't need to rely on a man. She knows that if a man behaves in an awful way, she can walk away. I would never have wanted to model anything different.
That's fantastic. And I like in this story that the kids are going to law school, or one of them's
Yeah.
going to law school. I mean, wants to be a family law lawyer, so she can take her compassion forward and use it to help others. I think that's brilliant. And
My
especially,
my oldest son is he's just trained to be a primary school teacher, and he actually said to me during this conversation in the pub, that he feels that I've modeled the right way of parenting and his father has modeled the wrong way of parenting. And he said he still wants to see his father because he's his father. He'll only ever get one father, so he wants him as part of his life. But he doesn't look on him as a father. He looks on him as somebody that's always going to be in his life, but someone who wasn't there for him and someone who didn't do the parenting and someone that didn't show him how to behave. And if that was me, no, I'd be mortified if someone thought of me like that, my own child.
sure.
I'd be devastated. So this is what you do, by just being the sane, sensible parent, you win in the long run. It's hard work. It's
Yeah.
really hard work being a single parent, but you win.
You did, and it's hard to feel that way, right? When you're cleaning up the messes and the vomiting illnesses and all that. You do not feel like you are winning. You really do not feel like this is going to pay off in the long run. But showing up is love, right? Showing up is love, and it can be infuriating when you have one of these Disney parents that just kind of swans in when when they feel like it and they don't show up, and that your kid kind of falls for it, right? Because they really want that attention and validation. My God, you got to eat that shit sandwich, man. And I think the kids figure it out. I mean, my son's 20, just turned 27, and we were having a conversation, and he brought it up. I try very hard not to ever mention his dad, um, where he said, I'm getting older, and I really understand why you don't like him, or like why. I mean, he's like, I have good memories, some good memories of him when I was a kid, but the way he's behaved, he's just this kind of weird guy that I don't have anything in common with mom. I, you know, and then he kind of went into this thing. He goes, he just wants to show up. He never calls me. He just wants to show up. He's like, I have a life. You gotta get on my calendar if you want to see me.
Well, the trouble is they want these people as accessories for the triumphant moments. So they
Yeah,
always
right.
pop up at the triumphant moments. I think this other comment as well just sums it up. Very life well lived. I raised my two youngest solo after divorce, strong, confident, proud young women. They don't take abuse from anyone. They witnessed me get new credentials. They witnessed to rebuild my law career after being a stay-at-home mum for 8 years. Goes on to say at 57, I'm a partner at the biggest firm in my area of expertise. I've inspired them to get the best credentials they can, to have the best earning ability in areas of their interests and never be dependent on any man. That's what you want. You want to be the inspirational character. You don't want to be the one that's never shown up, the sort of slightly weird person who just pops up as and when they fancy. You
Right.
know, that's what but it's hard to be that person because while you're the one having to try and juggle the childcare, finances, pay the bills, deal with stroppy teenagers. It's not glamorous.
No, not at all. It's hard, right? It's hard. And I don't know about the UK. I imagine it's not that much different, but we get a lot of messages, especially single mothers, that children, oh my God, they're going to be indicted. They're going to be career criminals, that their lives are doomed. They're so set back because they don't have a father figure in their life, or you know, that the single parent household is the worst. And I would say, first of all, how do you break out sure, people are going to be economically harder off after a divorce, generally speaking. But I think the strain that hurts children is living in a high conflict zone, not being raised by a strong single parent or grandparent or family unit or best friend or whatever. It's having people show up in your life. That's what matters. And you can't let the naysayers get in your head. And there's, every David Brooks essay in the New York Times, that shits on other women, not on other women, we can shit on them, on single mothers, like, deserves all scorn. I can't stand David Brooks. Anyway, that's my sermon on that. Maybe we should read something inspirational
Okay,
next.
so we've got a couple more, haven't we, that have
Oh
that have
yeah.
come in, and they're all very, very positive, and
Yeah.
I
They don't
the
have any
fact that
David Brooks in them whatsoever.
no.
Yeah. Okay, here's one. I got out just in time. My kids were teens to early 20s, and the fuckwit's golden child, 19 at the time, was starting to treat me the same as the fuckwit did. No more. I get respect, love, and even cherishing occasionally from all of them, including Kim. It's like they realized they had lived through a master class in what not to do. And as they choose partners, I see honesty, mutual respect, and maturity and mutuality, and a shared ambition to build a life together. Their partners are all good people, and I'm so proud of the lessons they chose to take from a weird and painful mess. That's that's gratifying when you see your kids making better
Well,
relationship choices than you did.
Well, this is it. Nobody wants their kids to be subjected to a weird and painful mess. And I think we all remember those moments when you bring your tiny newborn baby home and you are so protective and you think, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to be the best parent there is. And sometimes you think being the best parent is to stay part of a two-parent family. But actually, sometimes, in fact, all of the time, I'd say, if it's all gone wrong, the best parent you can be is you. You can't control, I think you can't control your co-parent, the second parent. You can only control your own behavior. And if you've got some dysfunctional antics going around with the other half of your parenting duo, then the best thing to do is to cut that off and just do the functional bit on your own without all these antics and shenanigans going on in the background.
Yeah. And I would say, when I went through it, when my son was 4, I divorced and I still had the shenanigans. We have words for this now, like litigation abuse and post-separation abuse. I had a guy who wasn't paying child support keep suing me for custody, even though the judge had decided he didn't get that. And and I want to tell you, because I know a lot of people are kind of going through that, or going through high conflict divorces, or thinking, I don't know how I'm going to be a sane parent because my life is pretty insane right now. That shit is finite. Don't let them steal your joy, and do your job. Your job is to be a parent. Get up and do it. And I'm telling you, years out, many years out, almost more than 20 years out now, it it turns out, just hold your children, enjoy your children. Even from the sidelines, people who can screw up your life can try to keep screwing it up or triangulate through the kids. And that's hard to deal with. But as Sarah says, you control your side of the aisle. You control what kind of parent you're going to be. And that's what really makes a difference in your kid's life. Generally, they give up, right? They get a good lawyer and they give up eventually. But you just got to stay the course. So that's that pep talk. Yours just
Yeah, and I
happily
think
waltzed away, didn't he? Nobody,
well,
nobody
yeah, he
sued
did, but
you afterwards.
he waltzes back in and as and when he fancies. So
That's its own kind of
whenever there's
hell.
a triumphant moment, so my children have done well in their exams, and he suddenly waltzes in and he's very proud. And actually, it wasn't just him; it was the grandparents, where
Oh
his
no.
father, who'd also had an affair, he sent my daughter a letter saying how upset he was that she wasn't part of his life, but I'd given sister part of life. And when I wasn't able to drive 300 miles and present the children to his 80th birthday party, which I wasn't invited to, but he wanted them there so he could show off his grandchildren, suddenly he cut me off. At
Oh,
that before that, I'd been quite happy to invite him into the children's lives to be part of him. But that was my tipping point. I thought, no, I'm sorry. If you want a relationship with your grandchildren, you can rely on your son to provide that relationship. And
yeah.
he doesn't have a relationship with his grandchildren, but he's very mournful and upset about it. So you're quite right. The dysfunction does sort of continue from afar, but you make it a sort of the sidelines of their lives rather than central to it by providing a very sensible and stable home. I don't talk about my ex-husband. We don't talk about him. He's not part of our lives. The only time I ever talk about him actually is during this podcast. I don't think about him. I don't talk about him. He means absolutely nothing to me.
But
And
he's
but he's
instructive.
there.
He's a good lesson. He's a good
He's
example of a bad
there in
example.
the periphery, and I get annoyed when he pops up and starts his comments about how proud he is, but that's about it. It's a bit like a wasp that's buzzing around in the distance. It's not, it's not there in my home. It's not impacting on a day-to-day basis.
That's right. And you can cut off the grandfather too. Oh, not going to your party.
Yeah,
So
I never have
sad.
to do. I
Bye-bye.
never have to do all the stuff which I'm sure a lot of people will relate to, where you do all the family
Appliance work.
maintenance,
Yeah.
the buying of Christmas presents and cards and taking
Oh,
the
yeah.
phone calls and doing all that sort of stuff. That all goes as well. Let them get on with it. You'll soon find that actually it doesn't get done by anybody.
That's right. They can hire a service or something. I wanted to take a moment to brag about our children, Sarah. I think we had all the doom and gloom long ago about how terrifying it would be to do this on your own. You've done it on your own. It sounds like all four of your kids have turned out pretty darn awesome. You want to brag about them a little bit?
So oldest Jacob is has just qualified as a primary school teacher, and my
Awesome.
daughter is off to university in September. My third oldest is about to get his GCSE results and is done very well at school, very academic, but also not just that. It's not just the academics. He's got a part-time job and he works every weekend. And one thing he said to me the other day was, "Do you know what? I'm glad we're not rich. If we were rich, I wouldn't appreciate money. I wouldn't have learned how to handle money." So
Oh,
although I felt guilty because a lot of his friends are wealthier than him and he's had to go and work part-time making sandwiches in the back of a kitchen, he he knows what it is to earn money. He appreciates money because he's been there working for very little, and it's given him more of a sense of control over his life, and knowing that things don't just materialize, and not chasing after shiny new things like his father does. And then my youngest son is also happy, secure. They're all people that I can look at and think, you've got the foundations, you're going to have a good future. I'm not sure whether that would be the case if their father had stayed, because it it wasn't, it was a very dysfunctional household with this uncertainty. He used to shout a lot. There
mm.
was a lot of, there was the worry about not knowing what he was up to. All went the moment he did. He took all of that with him. He took the dysfunction away.
Yeah. And
Let's hear about your son now, Tracy.
well, I'm very proud of my son, Robert. He's a good kid, other than a brief flirtation with libertarianism, which he seems to be coming out of. He's got a really sweet fiance. They both have good jobs. My son finished his master's degree early on, like when I was first going through divorce. I may have told this story before. He had this horrible, he got through kindergarten, then he had this, I was a single mother solidly by the time he was in first grade. And he had this awful teacher, Mrs. Pruskowski, Tuckahoe Elementary School, if you're out there. And she told me that my son was essentially stupid, and she was put him through this battery of tests. And and this was bizarre. She goes, he's a beautiful child. You could sell pictures of him, but you can't go through life trading on cuteness and charm. It
Oh,
was such a
lovely.
weird thing to say. And then Sarah, she blew a raspberry at me. She went "Pfft," and told me that my parenting skills were. "Pfft." And I've
Oh,
met this woman twice in my life. And I was the only single mother in the classroom. I mean, and I was going through just an absolute hell at that time.
I
And
don't think I've ever encountered a teacher that blew
I
raspberries at
know it
people.
was
It's a very interesting
crazy.
approach to life.
Another school administrator told me later that this was kind of a problem with this teacher, and she was close to retirement, and I just happened to be the person she picked on that year. But I'm telling you, it was a really vulnerable, awful time in my moment, and my and my reaction was I sold my house and put my son in a different school system. I'm like, fuck you. It was an extreme reaction, but if it was only middling bad, I might not have moved. But because it was so bad and I was so mad, and my son, by the way, tested as a totally ordinary kid. And there's nothing wrong if you do have a learning disability, but he didn't have one. And I had to go through all that. Anyway, got him in a new school. He thrived. He was fine. He didn't think he was a dummy. And, when he went through college and was getting straight A's, and when he went to graduate school and got straight A's and studied like macroeconomics and data engineering, and I don't know what the hell he's doing. He's doing something with the government with artificial intelligence and data, and I don't begin to understand it. I'm like, I think back to Mrs. Pruskowski who went at me for being a single mom, and I'm
But
like,
is he still
fuck you. He
trading on
turned out
that It's
Yeah,
there's that cuteness stood him in good stead, though,
yeah, you can
for life,
actually,
alongside with his academic
yeah,
credentials.
you can go pretty far trading on cuteness and charm, and he did. No, I kind of thought that was such a strange thing to say. I think she was trying to say my kid was just like pretty and dumb. I don't know. It was a really weird thing to say. She also said that he would play all the time if he could, and I'm like, yeah, he's 6
So
years
would
old.
anybody. It's six,
He's
yeah.
6 years old. That's
She
what he's
sounds like
supposed to
she needs
be
to go back to
doing.
teacher training school, really. So yeah,
Back to
an
the coal
interesting
mines
approach.
with you. I don't know. It was such a horrible experience. But I'm just saying, I got this vote of total no confidence when I really needed encouragement. And every time this kid hits a benchmark of some kind of success, I just think back to that awful woman, and I'm like, "Fuck you." And I'm not over it. I'm bitter, I guess. But more than like the accolades or whatever, your kid's doing okay. He's like a really nice person. And one of the moments I was actually proudest of him is a year or two ago, one of his close friends' father died suddenly. And my son, no prompting from me at all, made lasagna and brought it to the widow.
Oh,
And I'm like, Robert,
that is the ultimate, isn't it? Yeah,
it
kindness.
is. I'm like, also, you're my people. This is what like Midwestern people do when there's a crisis is you bring a casserole. So I was like, you turned out okay. You have a heart. You're a good person and you love people. And that's, you know, that he shows up. He showed up. And
Well,
that's what
I think it's interesting as well what you say about the school, because my youngest son does have a severe learning problem. He is severely dyslexic, so he left primary school unable to read and write, and I did everything. And the school blamed me. They said, "Oh, it must be you. You're a single mum. You've not got the time to do the reading with him." And I
oh,
said, "Hang on a minute, that doesn't make sense because my other son is exceeding all expectations. So surely, if I'm a bad parent to my youngest son, I'm also a bad parent to the other one. Your logic doesn't add up." But I
mm,
would go into the school and I would be made to feel like I was responsible and I was terrible. And in the end, I fought and fought. I got George what is an educational healthcare plan so that he gets the help that he needs. He can now read and write. He was
oh,
correctly identified as being severely dyslexic, which doesn't make him stupid. It just means that he
no,
learns in a very different way and he is successful. But I had to fight not just the system, but I had to fight the system trying to collude and blame me, saying,
yeah,
"Right, well, you look at you. You're a single parent. It must be your fault. There's something going on in your household. It's not us. It's you. It's you. Look at you. Your son can't read because of you." So I do think there is a tendency. You're vulnerable when you're on your own.
you are.
You haven't got somebody else to back you up and say, "Well, actually, no." And it is incredibly difficult to be the person that is doing all the fighting. And not only that, but almost feeling like you with the raspberry blowing individual, that they're also fighting you as well. But you will get through it, and you're a lot stronger than you think.
Yeah, George is a smart kid, and I knew my kid was. I mean, we have to assert their worth, and we have to assert our own worth, even when we're shaky and it's wobbly, and that's a hard job. I wanted to say about the dyslexic thing when I was going through this with my son. I had this teacher essentially saying he's washed up in the first grade, and I had just learned my grandfather was an inventor, and he invented electronic fuel injection. He had like 30 patents in automotive stuff. And for any gearheads who know what that is, but when he was a child, so my aunt had found all of his report cards, and he had a twin sister, Winfield and Winifred. How's that horrible to name your children that? But anyway, they found all his cards, his report cards was an early child, and he had failed every single grade. And on his report card, it said, inclined to mischief, only to learn later in life that my grandfather was profoundly dyslexic. He could not read and write, where he could actually had beautiful script, but he couldn't communicate in the normal ways that we expected back then. But what he had, getting to the dyslexia, was this visual memory. He could take engines apart in his head and put them together in other ways with all in his head without even touching it, seeing it. He had this visual mind that could invent. And because he was a man in that time, you could get a secretary and you could go to like, it was the Depression, so he got a job. You could get other people to do the writing for you. And he had 31 patents. So tell George that, you can do
Well,
great things.
the irony with George is you give George a Lego set and he can put it together instantly. Me, no.
Yeah.
But
He's got
then
that brain.
back to our first submission. That means he's never going to get a wife. He's doomed. He's
He
doomed.
will. He's going to get a wife and 32 patents. That's what's going to happen.
The moral of this story is you don't need a second parent. It's lovely if it all goes well and it's a functional, sane parent, but you can do this and you can triumph and you can do it on your own.
Amen. That wraps another episode of Tell Me How You're Mighty. You want to leave us a mighty story or a fuckwit of the week submission? Check out our new website, tellmehowyourmighty.com. That's yours spelt Y-O-U-R-E. We've got all the episodes, show notes, links to our guests, and you can see the tea room where Sarah and I first met. If you enjoyed this episode, please review the podcast and follow us. Thanks. See you next week.